The subpoena arrived on a Friday afternoon in March. I had just come back from the elementary school where I taught fourth grade. I was standing in my mudroom in my coat and scarf, holding the mail in one hand and a thermos of cold coffee in the other. The envelope was beige. It had a county courthouse seal in the upper left corner. The name on the envelope was the legal version of my name, Miss Imogen Henrietta Beresford. I had been Miss Beresford since I was 22 years old. I had not married. I had not changed my name. The name was the first thing I had ever owned that nobody could revise. I opened the envelope. I stood in the mudroom and I read the subpoena 3 times. I had been called to testify in a civil matter. The matter was Beresford v. Beresford. The case number was new. The petitioner was my mother, Felice Beresford. The respondent was my father, Garrett Beresford. The matter was a late-life divorce with a contested claim for spousal support. The hearing date was 11 weeks away. I was being compelled by my own mother's attorney to testify on her behalf about my father's conduct during their marriage. I sat down on the bench in my mudroom. I did not take off my coat. I read the subpoena a 4th time. I was 38 years old. I had been waiting for someone to ask me a question about my parents' marriage since I was 7. I had been waiting for 31 years. The question, when it came, was going to come from the wrong person. The question, when it came, was going to come from my mother's attorney. And the question, my mother's attorney would assume, would be answered the way my mother had been telling herself, and the rest of her social circle, the answer would be answered. My mother had not asked me the question first. She had not asked me what I would say. She had not, in 31 years, asked me what I had seen. She had assumed, the way mothers like my mother always assume, that I would tell the story she had been telling. I sat on the bench in my mudroom for 11 minutes. I called my father. I did not call him to tell him about the subpoena. I called him to ask him a question I had been preparing to ask him for a very long time. I said, "Dad, are you sitting down? I need to ask you something." He said, "Imogen, yes, I am sitting down. Go ahead." I said, "Dad, did you ever, in any of the years you were married to Mom, do anything you would be ashamed of me knowing about?" He paused. He said, "Imogen, no. I have done many things I am not proud of. I have done nothing I would be ashamed of you knowing." I said, "Dad, thank you." I hung up. I sat with my coat on for another 14 minutes. I called my father back. I said, "Dad, Mom has filed for divorce. I have been subpoenaed to testify on her behalf. I am going to call her attorney on Monday. I am going to tell him what I am going to say. What I am going to say is going to be the truth. The truth is not going to be what Mom is expecting." My father did not say anything for a long second. Then he said, "Imogen, are you sure?" I said, "Dad, I have been sure for 31 years. I have only been waiting to be asked." Welcome back to Broken Relations Stories. If you are new here, this channel is for the daughters whose mothers have spent their entire lives telling them a version of the family story they did not live in. The daughters who, when they were finally asked the question, told the truth. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, tell me where you are watching from, and let me take you back to the year I was 7, which was 1994, when my mother stood in our kitchen at 11 in the morning, holding a glass of wine in her left hand and the telephone receiver in her right, and told her sister Geneva, who was on the other end of the line, that my father had ruined her life. My name is Imogen Beresford. I am 38 years old. I have been an elementary school teacher for 16 years. I teach 4th grade at a public school in a small city in upstate New York. I live alone in a small Cape Cod house I bought 5 years ago with the help of an inheritance from my grandmother on my father's side, who left me $94,000 the year she died, and who had, when I was a child, been the only adult in my family who reliably told me the truth. My parents are Garrett Beresford, who is 71, a retired engineer, and Felice Beresford, who is 68, a woman who has not held a paid job since 1985, and who has, by her own account, been kept from working all those years by a controlling husband who would not let her have her own life. The story my mother has told, for as long as I can remember, is that my father is a cold, withholding man who spent 47 years of their marriage emotionally abusing her, financially controlling her, and isolating her from her family and friends. My mother has told this story at dinner parties. She has told it to her sisters. She has told it to her bridge club. She has told it in increasingly elaborate forms to anyone who would listen for the past 40 years. The story has, over those decades, calcified into the version my mother believes to be the truth. It is not the truth. I want to be very careful about how I tell you what the truth actually is, because I think most stories about families are stories about a villain and a victim, and the story I am about to tell you is not that story. The story I am about to tell you is the story of a woman who was unhappy, who was not abused, who blamed her unhappiness on the man she had married, and who built her entire identity over 4 decades around being the wronged wife of a quiet man who could not, no matter what he did, ever quite become the husband she had decided to be disappointed in. The woman in that story is my mother. The man in that story is my father. The witness in that story is me. I want to tell you about my father. He is 71. He has been an engineer for 47 years. He worked at a regional firm that designed water systems for small municipalities. He was, in his career, a quiet, exacting, kind man. He was, at home, the same man. He came home for dinner at 6:15 every night. He helped me with my math homework. He took me to the library on Saturday mornings until I was 14 and was embarrassed to be seen there with my father. He attended every parent-teacher conference. He came to every school play. He did not, in 31 years that I knew him as an adult, ever raise his voice at me. He did not, when I came out as gay at 24, react with anything other than warmth. He had said on that phone call, "Imogen, I love you. I am proud of you. Bring her home for Christmas. Your mother will adjust." She had not, in 14 years since, adjusted. She had instead decided that my coming out was something my father had encouraged, which she had begun to use as a piece of evidence in her ongoing case against him. My father had been, by then, used to being blamed for things he had not done. He had been being blamed for things he had not done for, at the time of my coming out, 22 years. He has been being blamed for them for, as of today, 36 years. I have not, for almost any of that time, said anything publicly to correct the record. I have, in my own quiet way, been the daughter who knew what the story was. I have not been the daughter who corrected my mother. I have not, in the language she uses with her sisters, been the daughter who was loyal. I have, instead, been the daughter who maintained, with my father, a careful private relationship that I have never described to her, because describing it would have required me to admit to her that I had been watching her for 31 years and had concluded that her version of her own marriage was not accurate. I had not wanted to do that. I had not, until the subpoena, been forced to. I want to tell you about my grandmother on my father's side, because she is part of this story in a way I have not been able to tell anyone before. Her name was Genevieve. She had been my father's mother. She had died when I was 16. She had, in the years before she died, been the only adult in my family who told me the truth about what I was watching. She had said to me, when I was 13, on a Sunday afternoon at her house, where I had been visiting her alone because my mother had refused to come, "Imogen, I want to tell you something. Your mother is not a bad person. Your mother is an unhappy person. There is a difference. The difference matters. Do not let her unhappiness become a story you carry around about your father. Your father is a good man. He has been a good man his entire life. He will continue to be a good man for as long as he is alive. The thing you need to do, sweetheart, is to know the difference between what your mother is feeling and what is actually happening in your house. Most of what is actually happening in your house is fine. Your mother just does not know how to feel fine. That is not your job to fix. It is not your father's job to fix either. He has been trying to fix it for 18 years. He will keep trying. He will not succeed. The only person who can fix it is your mother. You are not allowed, sweetheart, to spend your life trying to do it for her. I had been 13. I had been sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table. I had been holding a glass of iced tea. I had cried at that table. My grandmother had let me cry. She had then said, "Imogen, I want you to remember this conversation. There is going to come a day when someone asks you to tell the truth about your family. The day is going to come because these things always do. When the day comes, you are going to remember that I told you what the truth was. I am telling you now, while I'm alive, because I want you to know that you are not crazy. You are seeing what you are seeing. You are not making it up. The story you are quietly keeping in your head is the correct story. I love you, sweetheart. Now finish your tea." I had finished my tea. My grandmother had died 3 years later when I was 16. I had carried her sentence with me for 25 years. The day had come. I had remembered. I want to tell you about the day I knew I was 7. It was a Wednesday in October. My mother had been on the phone with her sister Geneva for 2 hours. I had come home from school. I had walked into the kitchen. My mother had not heard me come in. She had been pacing in front of the stove. She had a glass of wine in her hand. She had been telling Geneva about something my father had done that morning. She had been telling it in her storytelling voice, which I had already, by 7, learned to recognize. The storytelling voice was different from the regular voice. The storytelling voice had a particular intonation in it. The storytelling voice raised and lowered in places that were calibrated for the listener. The storytelling voice was the voice my mother used when she was, in her own way, performing. I had stood in the doorway of the kitchen. I had listened. My mother had been telling Geneva that my father had refused, that morning, to take her to a doctor's appointment she had been afraid to go to alone. She had been telling it as a story of cruelty. She had been telling Geneva that my father had simply walked out the door at 7 and gone to work and left her alone with her fear. I had stood in the doorway and I had heard, in the 7-year-old version of myself, an immediate and clear understanding that the story was not what my father had done. The story was not even what my mother had asked him to do. The story was a story my mother had invented in her head between the time my father had left for work and the time she had picked up the phone to call Geneva. My father had told her the night before in front of me that he had a meeting at 7:30 that he could not move and had offered to drive her to her appointment the day before or the day after, or to ask his sister to drive her, or to ask any of her own sisters to drive her. My mother had said the night before in front of me that she would drive herself. My father had said, again in front of me, that he was happy to find another way. My mother had said, finally, "Garrett, just go to your meeting. I will be fine." My father had nodded. He had gone to his meeting. My mother had spent the morning telling her sister a different version of the same conversation, the version in which my father had walked out and left her. I had been 7 years old. I had stood in the doorway. I had understood, in the slow, careful way that 7-year-olds understand things, that my mother was a person who told stories that did not match what had happened. I had walked back out of the kitchen. I had gone to my room. I had not that day said anything to anyone. I had also that day made a decision. The decision had been to start paying attention. I had been paying attention since. I had been paying attention for 31 years. I want to pause here for a second. If you have ever spent your entire childhood watching one parent tell a version of the family story that did not match what was actually happening in the family, and you have decided, sometime young, that you were going to be the keeper of the second story even if nobody ever asked you for it, then you know what that long quiet feels like. If this is hitting close, drop a comment. Subscribe if you have not. We are getting to the courtroom. I called my mother's attorney on Monday morning at 9:14 a.m. His name was Hugo Stratham. He had a practice in Albany. He was, by my mother's description, the best in the state. He was, by my private research, a competent but not exceptional family law attorney who specialized in elderly women claiming spousal abuse in late-life divorces. I called his office. His paralegal connected me. I introduced myself. I said, "Mr. Stratham, my name is Imogen Beresford. I have been subpoenaed in the Beresford matter. I am calling to give you the courtesy of letting you know what I am going to say in my testimony so that you can decide whether you still want me to testify." Hugo Stratham said, "Miss Beresford, of course. I appreciate your courtesy." "Please proceed," I said. "Mr. Stratham, my testimony, if I am called, will be that my father was not, in any of the years I lived with my parents or in the years I have known them as an adult, controlling, withholding, abusive, or unkind. My testimony will be that my mother has, for the entirety of my conscious memory, told stories about my father's behavior that did not match what I observed. My testimony will be that I do not believe my mother's claims for spousal support based on emotional cruelty are accurate, and that I am willing, under oath, to provide specific examples. I am giving you this information now because I do not want to ambush you in court. I also do not want to ambush my mother. If after we hang up you want to inform my mother of my position, you have my permission to do so. I am not, however, going to be calling her myself. She and I have not spoken in some detail about her marriage. We are not going to start now. There was a long silence on the line. Hugo Stratham said, "Miss Beresford, I would like a moment." He put me on hold. He came back 4 minutes later. He said, "Miss Beresford, I am going to need to consult with my client. Thank you for the call. We may or may not call you to testify. I will be in touch." I said, "Mr. Stratham, thank you." I hung up. My mother called me 3 hours later. She was crying. She said, "Imogen, how could you? How could you do this to me? Your father has destroyed me for 47 years. You have seen it. You know what I have lived with." I said, "Mom, I love you. I am not going to lie in court to support a version of your marriage that I do not believe is accurate. I have been telling you for 31 years in small ways that I see you and Dad differently than you see yourselves. You have not, in those 31 years, ever asked me what I see. I am not going to volunteer it to you on the phone today. I am also not going to volunteer it to a judge under oath. If your attorney calls me, I will tell the truth. I am sorry, Mom. I love you." My mother had hung up on me. She had not called back for 11 days. When she had called back, she had said, "Imogen, I have spoken with Hugo. I am going to drop the spousal support claim. Your father and I are going to proceed with a simple division of assets. I want you to know that this is your doing. I want you to understand what you have done to me." I said, "Mom, I understand the consequences of what I have said. I am sorry that you feel this way. I love you." She had hung up again. She had not called for another 6 weeks. The court hearing happened anyway. The spousal support claim had been withdrawn, but a small remaining matter regarding the disposition of certain personal property had been left to be resolved before the judge. The judge was the Honorable Persephone Holloway. She was 62. She had been a family court judge for 14 years. I had been called as a witness even after the spousal support claim had been withdrawn, because Hugo Stratham, I would learn later, had wanted me on the record. He had wanted me on the record because he had been, by his own quiet assessment of his client, beginning to suspect that my mother was not the kind of witness whose testimony alone would hold up in front of Judge Holloway. He had wanted a corroborating witness for the parts of my mother's story that he believed were true, and he had decided, in his strategic calculation, that he would rather have me on the stand briefly than not at all, because my absence would itself raise questions. The hearing was in May. I drove down. I sat on the bench outside the courtroom for 40 minutes before I was called. My father was inside, on the respondent side of the room, with his own attorney, a woman named Marjorie Whitfield, who had been his college roommate's wife 50 years ago and who had handled, in her career, exactly 3 divorces, all of them favors. My mother was on the petitioner's side. She did not look at me when I walked in. I took the oath. I sat in the witness chair. Hugo Stratham asked me a few small questions about household routines. He did it carefully. He was, I could tell, trying not to give me an opening to say more than he had asked. I answered the questions he asked. I did not volunteer anything. After 11 minutes, he said no further questions. Marjorie Whitfield, on my father's side, declined to cross-examine. Judge Holloway, however, looked up from her notes. She had been listening. She said, "Miss Beresford, I have one question, if you do not mind." I said, "Of course, Your Honor." She said, "Miss Beresford, you are an elementary school teacher. You see in your profession a great many families. You have known your own family for 38 years. I would like to ask you a simple question. Based on your own observations over the course of your lifetime, do you have a view on the character of the marriage your parents had?" Hugo Stratham stood up. He said, "Your Honor, with respect, I think the question may be outside the scope." Judge Holloway said, "Mr. Stratham, you called the witness. I am asking her a follow-up. Please sit down." Hugo sat down. The judge looked at me. She said, "Miss Beresford, you may answer. I had been waiting 31 years. I had been waiting since I was 7. in a kitchen doorway with my mother in front of the stove. I had been waiting since I was 13 at my grandmother's kitchen table with a glass of iced tea. I had been waiting since I was 24 on a phone call telling my father about Theodora. I had been waiting for someone in a position of authority to ask me a direct question in plain language and to expect me to answer it honestly. The wait had been long. The waiting was over. I said, "Your Honor, my parents have been married for 47 years. My mother has been deeply unhappy for most of those years. I do not believe my father caused that unhappiness. My father is a kind man. He has always been a kind man. I have watched my mother tell a story about my father repeatedly over decades that does not match my observation of who my father has been. I love both my parents. I am not here to harm my mother. I am here today because I was asked. The truth, as I have observed it, is that my father did not cause my mother's unhappiness. My mother's unhappiness is older than the marriage. I think it is older than my father. I think it has been her companion since before she met him. I have not been able to give that to her in 31 years. I am not able to give it to her in this courtroom today. I am only able to tell you what I saw. Thank you, Your Honor." The courtroom was very quiet. Judge Holloway nodded. She said, "Thank you, Miss Beresford. You may step down." I stepped down. I walked past my mother. She did not look at me. I walked past my father. He looked at me. He nodded once. I walked out of the courtroom. I sat on the bench outside. Marjorie Whitfield came out 14 minutes later. She sat down next to me. She said, "Imogen, your father wanted me to tell you something. He said to tell you that your grandmother would have been proud of you. He said you would know what he meant." I said, "Marjorie, I do." She squeezed my hand. She went back inside. I sat on the bench for another 22 minutes. I cried a little quietly into a tissue. I had not cried for myself in a courthouse before. The crying had not been sad. The crying had been the kind that comes when a long-held thing is finally set down. I want to tell you what happened after that, because I think the part of this story that I have not yet told you is the part that I think matters most. My mother and father divorced 8 months after the subpoena. The divorce was, in the end, simple. They split the marital assets evenly. My mother received half of my father's pension. She received half of their retirement accounts. She received the house, which was paid off. My father moved into a small apartment in the same city. He has been there ever since. He has been, by his own account and by mine, content. He plays bridge twice a week with 3 other retired engineers. He tutors high school students in math on Tuesday afternoons through a community program. He has dinner with me every other Sunday when I drive down to see him. He has been, in his retirement, more himself than I had seen him in my entire adult life. He had been smaller. I had not understood until the divorce, in the house with my mother. The smallness had been a function of being in a marriage in which his ordinary kindness had been continuously reframed as inadequate. He had been, for 47 years, accommodating a version of himself that my mother had been telling him was the version that was hurting her. He had not stopped accommodating it until after the divorce. He had begun, in the year since, to grow back into the man he had been before the marriage. The man he had been before the marriage was, by his own admission, very similar to the man he was during the marriage. The difference in the apartment was that nobody was telling him anymore that the man he was not enough. My mother has not, in the year since the divorce, called me regularly. She has called me 4 times. The 4 phone calls have been, in their own way, the most honest conversations my mother and I have ever had. She has not apologized. She has not, I think, fully understood what she did. She has, however, started to wonder in small ways whether the story she had been telling herself for 47 years had been quite the story she had thought. She had said, in our 3rd phone call in late summer, "Imogen, I have been talking to my therapist. She has been suggesting that I think about whether I had been telling my own story in a particular way that may not have been entirely accurate." I had said, "Mom, that sounds like good work." She had said, "Imogen, do you think I have been telling it in a particular way?" I had said, "Mom, yes." She had said, "Imogen, what way?" I had said, "Mom, I am going to be honest with you. You have been telling it in a way that made Dad the source of your unhappiness. I do not think Dad was the source of your unhappiness. I think you were unhappy. I think you have been unhappy for a long time. I think Dad has been mostly a kind, quiet man who has been doing his best. I do not know what made you unhappy. I do not think it was Dad. I have been your daughter for 38 years. I am telling you the truth. I love you." My mother had been quiet for a long minute. She had said, "Imogen, thank you. I do not know what to do with that. I am going to think about it." She had hung up. She had called me back the next month. She had not, in that call, mentioned my father. She had asked me about my work. She had asked me about my partner, Theodora, whose name she had not used in 14 years and who she had, in that call, asked about by name. I had said, "Mom, Theodora is good. She is teaching a class she is enjoying. She would love to see you sometime." My mother had said, "Imogen, I would like to see her. Could the two of you come for dinner?" I had said, "Mom, yes, we would like that. If you have ever had to tell a parent the truth about themselves, gently, without cruelty, because the truth was finally being asked of you in a setting that required you to give it, then you know what the months after that call felt like. If this story is hitting close, drop a comment. Subscribe if you have not. We are at the part I want to end with. My mother and Theodora and I had dinner in October. It was the first time my mother had met Theodora in 11 years. Theodora is 42. She is a clinical social worker. She has been my partner for 9 years. She had, in the years she had known about my mother, been kind. She had been, in the way that clinical social workers sometimes are, the kind of person who could sit across a table from a difficult mother-in-law without becoming defensive. The dinner had been, by my private estimation, the best meal my mother and I had ever had together. My mother had been on her best behavior. Theodora had been her usual self, which is gentle and curious and exact. My mother had asked Theodora about her work. My mother had told a story about a piece of music she had been listening to. My mother had not, in 2 hours of conversation, mentioned my father once. My mother had not, in 2 hours of conversation, told a single story in the storytelling voice. She had been, that evening, a version of herself I had not seen since I was a small child. The version of herself who had not yet needed to be the wronged woman. I do not know how much of that version is going to stick. I do not know whether my mother is going to continue the work she has been doing with her therapist. I do not know whether the change I saw at the dinner is going to be a sustained change or a temporary one. I am preparing for either. I have learned to prepare for either with my mother. The preparation is the work. The work is the love. The love is the thing that has, in the end, held our relationship together through the 31 years I had been waiting to be asked. The love had been there the whole time. The love had only needed, finally, to be asked. A year and 3 months after the subpoena, this is where we are. My father is well. He continues to live in his small apartment. He continues to play bridge on Tuesdays and Fridays. He continues to tutor high school students in math. He has this year started to learn to bake bread. He has, by his own account, learned to make a sourdough loaf he is proud of. He brings me a loaf every other Sunday when I come for dinner. The bread is, in fact, very good. He has in the bread found a thing he had been waiting his entire life to make. He had not, in 47 years of marriage to a woman who told him he was not enough, ever made a loaf of bread. He is making one a week now. The bread is the work. The work is the love. The love is the thing that has, in the end, held my father together through the 47 years he had been waiting to be allowed to be himself. He had been himself the whole time. He had only needed, finally, to be allowed. I want to tell you about one specific Sunday with my father because it has stayed with me. It was a Sunday in late October. I had driven down. He had made dinner. We had eaten at his small kitchen table. He had served the bread he had baked that morning. After dinner, he had cleared the plates. He had made us each a cup of tea. He had sat down. He had said, "Imogen, I want to thank you for what you did in the courtroom in May. I have not, in the months since, found the right way to say it. I am going to try now." I had said, "Dad, you do not have to thank me." He had said, "I do. I want you to understand. I have been your mother's husband for 47 years. I have known the entire time that your mother was unhappy in a way I could not fix. I had been trying to fix it for so long that I had stopped knowing how to be anything other than the man who was trying to fix it. The man who was trying to fix it was a smaller man than I had been before the marriage. I had not known how much smaller until you stood in that courtroom and told the judge what you told her. I had been hearing your mother's version of our marriage for so long that I had begun to wonder in the quiet of my own thoughts whether her version had been more accurate than mine. I had not wanted to believe it. I had also not wanted to disrespect her by ruling it out. When you said what you said in the courtroom, I had the feeling, for the first time in 47 years, of being a man who was being seen. I want you to know that. I want you to know that what you did was not just the truth. It was a gift. The gift was the seeing. Thank you, Imogen. I had cried at the kitchen table. My father had not interrupted. He had let me cry. He had handed me his napkin. He had said, "Imogen, I love you. Your grandmother loved you. Your grandmother told me the year before she died that you were the kind of granddaughter who was paying attention." I had not known what she meant until you sat in that witness chair. I know now. Thank you, sweetheart. Your tea is getting cold. I had drunk my tea. We had eaten more bread. The Sunday had ended at 9. I had driven home. I had thought on the drive that my grandmother had known in 1995 what would happen in 2025. She had not known the specifics. She had known me. She had decided on a Sunday afternoon at her kitchen table that I was going to need to know, eventually, that what I was seeing was not a thing I had imagined. She had been correct. The 13-year-old at her kitchen table had been carrying her sentence ever since. I had been the keeper of the second story. The second story had been, in the end, the true one. The keeper had been thanked. The keeper had finally, after 31 years, been allowed to set the story down. My mother is in therapy. She has, in the past 3 months, begun to make a friend through her therapy group whose name is Lavinia. Lavinia is 71. Lavinia is also divorced. Lavinia has, by my mother's description, a particular way of asking my mother questions that my mother has been finding challenging in the right way. My mother and Lavinia go to lunch every Wednesday. My mother has, in the 4 months since they began to be friends, called me 3 times to tell me about something Lavinia said. Each of the somethings has been a small piece of self-recognition. Each of the somethings has been, in its own way, a small revision of the story my mother has been telling. I do not know whether the revisions will continue. I am, for now, glad they are happening. I have spent 31 years waiting for my mother to revise the story. I had thought, somewhere in me, that the revision was going to come from a confrontation. The revision is coming, instead, from a 71-year-old woman in a therapy group who is gentle and patient and has been through her own version of the same long quiet. Lavinia is doing, for my mother, what I had not been able to do for 31 years because I had been her daughter and not her peer. The work of revising your own story is not, it turns out, the work that the people who love you can usually do for you. The work is the work of being held by someone who has been through it and who can ask you the question in a way that does not feel like an attack. I am grateful for Lavinia. I do not know her. I hope, in a way I had not expected to, that she stays in my mother's life for a long time. I have not, in the year since the divorce, dated anyone other than Theodora. We are still together. We have, in the year, begun to talk about buying a slightly larger house together in a town with a better high school because Theodora's mother is getting older and may eventually need to move closer. The conversation about the house has been a long, careful, exact conversation. We have been planning it together. We have been deciding together. The deciding has been, in its own way, the inverse of the marriage my parents had. The deciding has been a shared activity. The deciding has been, in the way I had been waiting my entire life to know, what a partnership feels like when it is being constructed by 2 adults who are paying attention to each other on purpose. The cardinal that visits the bird feeder I put up in my front yard last year came back this morning. I had hung the feeder when I moved into the Cape Cod house 5 years ago. I had not, for a long time, seen a cardinal in this yard. I had assumed there were not any cardinals in this particular neighborhood. There were not, I had eventually concluded, anything special about this particular feeder. The feeder had been a feeder. The cardinal had come this morning for the first time. He had stayed for a minute and a half. He had taken 3 pieces of seed. He had flown away. He has, I imagine, decided that this is the kind of yard he might come back to. I have not, in 5 years, been the kind of person who waited for cardinals. I had been the kind of person who was busy. I have been in the last year less busy. The less buzzy version of me has been more available, somehow, to small visiting birds. I do not know if the cardinal is going to come back. I am leaving the feeder full. I have been leaving feeders full, in one way or another, for a long time. The feeders have always eventually been visited. The visits are the work. The work is the love. If you made it this far, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been the witness in your own family's long story? The one who saw it all and was never asked? Drop a comment. Tell me the question you have been waiting to answer. Tell me whether it has been asked yet, and whether you said the thing you had been preparing to say for years, and whether the saying of it changed anything, and whether the changing was what you had been hoping for, or whether it was something else. I read every single comment. I mean that. I want to say one last thing to the daughters who have been the quiet witnesses. The work of being the witness is hard. The work of being the witness is lonely. The work of being the witness is sometimes a thing you carry your whole life without ever being asked to lay it down. The work of being the witness is real work. It is the work of memory. It is the work of integrity. It is the work of being the daughter who knew and who decided, somewhere young, to keep knowing. You are not crazy. You did see what you saw. The day someone asks you to tell the truth, you are going to remember every single detail you have been keeping. You are going to remember the kitchen and the storytelling voice and the doorway and the 7-year-old you who decided, in 1994 or whenever your version of it was, that someone was going to be the keeper of the second story. You have been her. You have done the work. The work has been worth it. Thank you for being her. I see you. If you know someone who needs to hear this today, share it with them. There are more stories like this on this channel. The link is in the description. I will see you in the next one. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here, especially for the whole series. We did this together. I am so glad you came.